This is MJ. I love Star Wars, and right now I want to talk about Dooku, Jedi Lost. Is that what it's called? The audio drama / book written by Cavan Scott. Cavan Scott is going to be writing the Marvel High Republic, or Star Wars The High Republic series, obviously for Marvel Comics. I looked him up and I found out that he did a little bit of comic work. I think he did the IDW, like Star Wars Adventures. I don't know, it's like Ray and Friends or something like that. And just did a real cursory bit of research on his comics work, mostly because I figured, well, I just listened to a whole book of his. I don't necessarily need to go down the rabbit trail and see what all he's done. But the reason I checked out his book was because in my interest has been piqued by the High Republic era, which you probably know if you've been around recently, because I just did a discussion, or I just talked about a theory I have about the Nihil and what they'll be doing and how they'll be a threat to the Jedi, etc., etc. And it was interesting to me that as I was doing my research on him a little bit, looking at the Project Luminous announcement and the various different articles that were up on the Lucasfilm, or it's the Star Wars website, talking about all the authors who are working on the project together. I hit Control H or F, I can't remember what it is, anyway, to find his name, and it almost seemed like, if I read this correctly, he was the one who suggested the idea of what is it that makes the Jedi afraid. Although I thought I'd heard Kathleen Kennedy say that she said that, but maybe that's what got her excited about it. I don't know, doesn't matter. The point is, I wanted to talk about him in context, and I might do this for other authors who have been featured. I do have Last Shot, which actually, I did a review of Last Shot already, so that might not make sense. But anyway, the point is, I checked out Cavan Scott, and I did it through listening to the audio drama of Dooku, Jedi Lost, which, it's funny to me, in the interview, as I was scanning through, they were talking about all the different multimedia. They were talking about making Project Luminous, or what we now know as the High Republic, Star Wars publishing push, to make it multimedia. And somebody was naming different genres of different genres of media, or not genres, I guess types of media. And he said audiobook or audio drama, which is funny because he did a big audio drama for Lucasfilm, and I kind of think that was his first thing that he'd done for them, but I'm not 100% sure. But regardless, this is a less of a review of Dooku, Jedi Lost, and more of an observation of Cavan Scott as an author, and what I'm thinking he's going to bring to the Project Luminous edition of to the Marvel Comics with Star Wars The High Republic. So, that all being said, overall, I did like the Dooku story. I thought it was interesting because it was a Dooku story, but it was also an Asajj Ventress story, and them being Master and Padawan, that makes sense because as the story itself says, the bond between a Master and a Padawan is sacred. But the thing that was more interesting to me is that it was I don't know if they had planned from the beginning that his book would be turned into an audio drama, because in listening to the story, it felt as if maybe the script for the audio drama was altered from the book, adapted from the book, because there were some areas where the characters would kind of describe the action that was going on, but then there were some areas where there would just be grunting and straining and noises like that, where I imagined there would have been dialogue, or not dialogue, but descriptions in the prose explaining what was going on. And the thing that was most glaring to me is that the fact that, and this is minor spoilers for the story, for Dooku, Jedi Lost, is that the framing device for the whole narrative is basically Asajj Ventress is going through holo recordings, holo vids, and data tapes or whatever that Dooku has given her access to, and then even a data pad that has his journal or diary on it. And she's going through all these things in order to relive her, or to gather information on a certain subject. But in order to do that, she, and therefore we, the audience, get to vicariously live through a bunch of experiences that Dooku had that formed him into the man he is today. And that being I don't know, at some point during his time as Darth Tyrannus, even though it's unclear to me exactly when the book takes place. But it's some time, it's probably, well, it's right after, it's, sorry. It's right before she, not necessarily right before, but it's sometime before she has been revealed to Obi-Wan and to Anakin. And in an interesting way, I'll circle back to that. Put a pin in that. Something interesting. Tartakovsky, I'll just say that, and then I'll come back to it, hopefully. Anyway, but the whole thing is, it's interesting because the framing device is pretty blatant, and it kind of bothered me in some places. And then, in addition, she is communicating with somebody throughout the whole book, and the nature of the individual she's communicating with is unclear to me, and I found it a little bit frustrating. I don't enjoy it being left up to interpretation, because whether or not the status of the person she's communicating with throughout the story is pretty important, because depending on where they are, let's say that, depending on where they are at the time that they're communicating with Asajj, it has very serious implications for the story, for Jedi lore, for the Force, and things like that. And I was a little frustrated by that. So overall, I liked it. I felt sympathetic towards Dooku, and not his turn to the dark side, but his turn away from the Jedi Council, from Yoda, from the Republic even. When we see Dooku, when we first meet Dooku, when we first meet him in a serious way in Attack of the Clones, he is talking to Obi-Wan about how the Republic has been infiltrated by the Sith, how the Republic is corrupt, and how terrible those things are. And those things are all true. And I think Scott did a really good job of turning the young, hopeful Padawan we meet in the story into the Count Dooku / Darth Tyrannus who we know in the films and Clone Wars and all that stuff. So overall, I thought the storytelling was very effective. There was some dialogue I did not like. On the positive side, though, we got to learn more about Sifo Dyas. We got to learn, or we were introduced to some older Jedi Masters who, as far as I know, I really, really like Star Wars, but I like the core of it. I'm not as into the periphery of all of it, so I don't know if some of these are new characters or not, and I can't remember any of their names, but it's probably because I was listening to it while I was doing other things, not reading the words off the page with my eyes where it could sink in a little bit better. But I really enjoyed everybody who we got to meet, and I could see having different adventures and having different stories with them. And I would say one other problem that I had with the story overall was that because it was just Ventress kind of scrubbing through these communications that Dooku had saved, there was a little bit of a feeling of kind of like the Solo movie, where you just like jumped from event to event to event. And I enjoyed the Solo movie overall, but I also enjoyed this book overall. But I don't know, there's something about the way the narrative was woven together just didn't quite sit right with me for a book. Now, I think for a comic book, because the audiobook was 6 hours and change, not close to 7, less than 6.5, probably 6:12 or something like that. But anyway, the fact that Scott was able to weave an overarching narrative through all these smaller stories, actually, now that I really think about it, gives me hope that his comic series will be able to do something similar. And, does it need to be, it'll probably have an overarching story, which I kind of expect, and I prefer that overall. But if it's kind of one-offs, like classic comic books where they were all one and done, that could be interesting too. But I do think the objective, as far as the story group, or not the story group, but the Project Luminous, people, or the Project Luminous launch event for the High Republic, is like the way they made it sound from that. I think that we're going to get an overarching story that'll be interconnecting through the various forms of media. But speaking of overarching forms of media and overlapping, I thought that the book itself did a really good job of touching on other things. I don't want to spoil anything. Let me just say there are connections to Master and Apprentice, the book that Claudia Gray wrote, which involved Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi. And That was a really good book, by the way. And anyway, it connected to that, and I think it connected to some other things that were out at the time that I didn't personally check out, but it connected to something that was very exciting to me, the Genndy Tartakovsky Clone Wars. So, if you've seen the micro-series, the season 1 of it, the way it describes Asajj Ventress, where she was found by Dooku, less the way it describes and more what it just shows you. It looks as if Cavan Scott worked off of that micro-series origin, so to speak, of Asajj Ventress, and expanded it and adapted it to fit the lore established by Katie Lucas and others, because Katie Lucas did a lot of great work in the Clone Wars, Star Wars: The Clone Wars, in establishing, like, she basically wrote Asajj Ventress in, what was it, season 3 and on, that turned her into a real character. And if you don't know Asajj Ventress, she went from being kind of a hokey villain who kept getting beaten into an actual full-fledged character who you could actually care about. She was a cool, fun villain to watch fight because she's dynamic and has an interesting design, but she really got to be a person, got to be a character through Star Wars: The Clone Wars. And Star Wars: The Clone Wars didn't reject anything from Asajj Ventress's origins as they were told in various forms in what is now known as Legends through the Dark Horse comics, through the Tartakovsky microseries and such. It did a really good job of synthesizing and blending that all into one mythos, and Cavan Scott went ahead and carried that tradition on, and layered more texture onto Ventress and on the Ventress-Dooku relationship and how they met and things like that. And I found all of that very interesting. I like how he was able to roll with all the existing, and now I think we were definitely beyond Legends at this time, but some things from Legends were being brought back in, like in the Ahsoka novel. They brought things in from Legends, as well as A New Dawn. They brought a lot of things in from Legends, and reintroduced them into the canon in a very nice way. And like I said before, Cavan Scott did a good job of doing that throughout the book. So even if some things were a little disjointed and I didn't like all of it, I am hopeful about what Cavan Scott can do in the High Republic era in his High Republic comic that he's going to be putting out with Marvel. A quick addendum. I wanted to be sure to mention the fact that the High Republic is alluded to, or I guess it's directly referenced in this comic. There's also a pretty oblique reference to the ancient Jedi, Lene, as let's see, I can't remember her last name, but Lene mentions with the binding thing that she and Dooku and Sifo-Dyas do to help cleanse themselves and center themselves and things like that. She mentions that comes from the ancient Jedi, and that there are so many things that the Jedi have forgotten. Then I can't remember exactly what the reference to the Old Republic, to the High Republic was, but it wasn't that significant. It was just a little tidbit. But again, Cavan Scott wrote that in Dooku Jedi Lost. I don't know how old that is, but and I haven't checked the timeline to see if they were already, kind of trying to sprinkle things in there, or so like, hey, we're gonna work in the High Republic someday, so you might want to just throw a mention of it in there somewhere, in something you're doing. Maybe they said that to multiple authors, because apparently the lady featured in the holocron that's in issue 3, I think, of The Rise of Kylo Ren, she turns out to be the Jedi lady with like the coronet on her, the very thin crown type thing, circlet, I guess, on her in the promotional images. So that's just interesting, and I wanted to make sure I mentioned that because I think I forgot to say it earlier. Thanks for sticking with me. Check out mjmunoz.com for more of my work. I'm an aspiring author who will gladly accept your financial support through coffee, or you can buy merch from my Redbubble store. I have a pretty cool Luke Skywalker design up there with a quote from the Star Wars comics from the Rise of Kylo Ren. Swinging Through Comics, or MJ Loves Star Wars, which is hosted on Swinging Through Comics, can be found on YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and mjmunoz.com/STC. Relevant links are in the show notes. If you had a good time, like and share this. Subscribe and ring that bell to catch me next time I'm Swinging Through Comics. And why don't you tell me, or I guess next time I'm love in Star Wars. I don't know how to close that one out. Anyway, let me know what you think about Cavan Scott. If you read any of his other Star Wars comics, or if you have strong thoughts on Dooku, Jedi Lost that I didn't share, I'd like to hear more from you. Oh, also one more thing. Something else I checked out was the One of the Jedi, because I have Marvel Unlimited because of the whole comics thing, and it mentions Ashla and Bogan, and Bogan at least is mentioned here in the Dooku book. So that was pretty cool. I like that Scott was referring back to that stuff. I know Ashla and Bogan are from old, like Lucas Notes or whatever from the Journal of Wills. And they've made appearances in other things throughout Star Wars, and mostly in Legends, but then some in the new canon stuff. So that's pretty exciting. So let me know if you have any thoughts on that, or questions, comments, concerns. If you can point me to anything else from these authors that are going to be connected to the High Republic era that I should check out.